Ever wonder how real change happens? Ubuntu Narratives podcast uncovers the extraordinary stories of ordinary Africans building a more just and equal world. In each episode, we sit down with a change maker who reveals the triumphs, challenges, and practical steps that you can take to make a difference in your own community. Tune in and find the inspiration to act. Welcome to Season 2 of the Ubuntu Narratives podcast. In this series, we explore the realities, challenges, and possibilities of gender equality in African workplaces. Tune in and find your inspiration to act. Hi, friends. Welcome to Ubuntu Narratives podcast. I'm your host, Christine Butegwa. Today, we're joined by Jen and Elizabeth, two members of the COFEM Wellness Working Group. We're going to have a very powerful and hopefully inspiring conversation around self-care and well-being at work. COFEM is the Coalition of Feminists for Social Justice, a global advocacy collective of practitioners, activists, and academics working globally to end violence against women. In today's episode, we will explore why self-care is not just a personal practice, but as a political act as well. And it's a political act for women and other marginalized groups. And we'll also why organizations should weave well-being within their cultures in meaningful ways. Jen and Elizabeth, welcome again. I want to give both of you an opportunity to introduce yourselves. I will start with Elizabeth. Please introduce yourself.
Christine, thank you so much for this invitation. I really appreciate it. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Louis, and I'm a psychologist, Haitian American, and based in the U.S., and I am COFEM's wellness consultant. I'm so happy to be here today.
Welcome, Elizabeth. Jen, please introduce yourself.
Hi, yes, thank you so much, Christine, for this invitation. I'm so excited to have this chat. I've been working in the space countering violence against women, mostly tech-facilitated violence, for the last 15 years. At first with the international organizations and then with civil society members as a freelance consultant working specifically with journalists and political actors and human rights defenders. And now I'm back in school to get a degree in counseling psychology so I can become more of a therapeutic resource for the same community that I've been with for many years.
Thank you. And, glad to have you here, Jen and Elizabeth. To set the context for our discussion or conversation today around self-care and well-being, I just wanted us to look broadly at, one study by WHO said that mental health challenges cost the world about $1 trillion every year in lost productivity from mental health challenges in the workplace. So this is things like anxiety, burnout, depression. So mental health challenges are a big issue now. And especially in 2026, we see the workplace really going through upheavals in both the private sector and the development world, where we've lost a lot of, organizations have lost funding. There are so many changes and shifts. There's, the conflict in the world, which has reduced funding to development work. So a lot of organizations are facing stresses and have had to let people go. So there's rising unemployment, and sometimes that is abrupt. And so this has also, led to, rising cases of depression and other mental health mental health issues within the workforce. We also see in COVID-19, the whole world kind of was able to have a collective conversation around self-care, but it was kind of co-opted from what the feminist, the feminist activists who came up with this concept of self-care. It was, the world was taking it in a different context from what it was originally about. So I wanted us to, bring it back to the origins, the feminist origins of self-care. And to our audience that may not know what self-care is, I wanted to start, maybe Elizabeth, if you could start us off with defining for us, what does self-care and well-being mean to you, and how does it connect to mental health?
Yeah, sure. So for me personally, when I think about self-care, I think about ways in which I'm able to rest my mind, my body, and my spirit. So for me, that means pouring back into myself, especially with the work that I do as a psychologist, providing therapy and seeing folks that have experienced trauma or even responding to a crisis. So sometimes I get depleted by the work. So for me, self-care means what are ways that are practical and realistic for my mind, my body, and my spirit to rest. And that could look in different ways on a different day. So whether I'm trying to rest my mind by taking the time to journal about my day, or maybe I'm resting my spirit by engaging in some type of prayer, or I'm resting my body by doing some sort of dance movements that can really help me to reduce the tension of my body. So I think self-care, at least for me, is ways in which I'm able to slow down and be more present and care for myself. And in well-being, I think it's the totality. It's not just the inclusion of self-care, but it's also financial well-being, social well-being. So there's so many different subcategories, and that may mean different things for different people. But it's what is it that in your current season that you need in order to thrive, in order to or maintain or to have a steady life in what you envision. And I know that's a privilege, and having a holistic well-being. But I think well-being can address financial well-being, economic, spiritual, mental well-being as well. So those are some things that comes to mind for me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's really important. The holistic, looking at well-being holistically, not only physical, but financial, mental, and spiritual. And Jen, I wanted to ask you to help us unpack why feminists, position self-care as a political act. Why is it a political act? Because, like I said, during COVID-19 and afterwards, a lot of corporates took up self-care because everyone was burnt out with having to do so many Zoom meetings and doing work in a different way. At the time, we all hadn't been online that much, and there was a lot of burnout. And corporates, in a good way, came on board and said, yeah, let's also give our employees self-care and put money into that. But the flip side was that did corporates understand where self-care came from, why it is a political act, especially for women and marginalized groups. So Jen, if you could kind of give us a background and some understanding around self-care and its roots in feminism and why it's a political act.
I mean, I think we all know that since time began, women, particularly women's labor, has been taken without payment and without care for women and relied upon. I don't know the exact statistics, but it's trillions of dollars a year that women provide to our communities and to our countries for free. And I think that that is something that women as a whole have started to really kind of see and say, wait a second, why is this happening? Not only is it happening, are we being taken advantage of, and our time and labor is being minimized and utilized for other things, but also why is it that our needs are not being addressed in return? So we're getting, the bottom of the barrel in both cases. And I think feminist well-being and the idea of self-care is really a reclamation of our own labor and our own value. And I think it's about creating community around us. That's something that women have always been good at, is community building and investing in structures of care within the community. And I think really kind of looking at the structures that be and say, do they serve us? Are they providing me security, comfort, validation, and do they align with my value? I think just those questions and removing the things that don't serve you and don't meet your values, I think that in itself is really quite an act of rebellion. And it provides for you as an individual much more capacity to be engaged and to support your broader community. So it's not just for reclamation of feminist value and women's inherent value in the labor they've contributed. It's also for much more cohesive and supportive and integrated societies, I think, ultimately.
And that's very important to note, the reclaiming of women's time. But it also means that as more women get into the workforce and organizations need to really be aware of what are the systems they have in place that, bring more equality in terms of the time the time that both women and men bring into the workforce, but also the double work burden that women have. They work in their 9-to-5 jobs, but then they go back home and have to do the housework, the caring for the sick and other loved ones. So we have organizations that sometimes have not, developed structures to reduce that care burden that women have, the double care burden that you're talking about, Jen. And I wonder, when we're looking at, the challenges that come with in the workplace, in terms of promoting self-care and well-being, what are some of the challenges you've seen that leaders and employees face in practicing self-care and well-being in the workplace? And do you see any difference in challenges for men and women when it comes to well-being and self-care in the workplace?
Yeah, sure. Then I'll go ahead and if that's fine, Elizabeth. I mean, I think the overarching obstacle to self-care in the workplace is the business model. And by that, I mean, it is about the commodification of labor. And that is often what jobs usually are, of course, right? But it's given the structures that currently exist. And as a society in all parts of the globe, women's opinions, women's needs, women's community, women's skills are minimized and marginalized in favor of those provided by men. And I think that in the workplace, we see a greater commodification of this idea of self-care for women and generally for everyone. We see it at, Meta, where they have ping pong tables and they have masseurs who come around and give massages and they have access to all sorts of things, right? But they're looking at a very specific, measurable, whether it's play or it's free time but it's really a commodification, because what you're actually getting is more time that individual workers spend at the workplace. So it's not actually about lessening the burden of work, about creating outlets for resilience and getting rid of stress, about opportunities for the expansion of you as a human being, both in the workplace and at home. And in fact, I think it's even more giving credence to this idea of a separation between work and life balance. And for the life of me, I don't know how we can separate work and life. I think that it's a misnomer, and I think that it has this normative concept and acceptance that we have of this idea has really created a really detrimental situation in the workplace, but also made it really easy for them to give little bits and pieces of rest or resilience mechanisms, or we're going to offer a yoga class at the workplace, or but it's not really meaningful when it comes to alleviating structural oppression, alleviating the stress and the anxiety put on an individual by systemic request and need. So I think it comes back to commodification and really giving little bits as tick marks, as stand-ins for what would be really something that has meaningful impact.
And if I could add as well, I think there are I think majority of workplaces don't have feminist-based policies. For example, if we're thinking about maternity leave, not all maternity leave is equitable, but even if a woman chooses not to have children, even in terms of recognizing important sexual reproductive health considerations, especially in the workplace. Is it conducive to certain conditions for women? And then also recognizing when we're talking about the workplace is very broad because there's so many different types of workplace experiences, whether you have offices or you have some informal sort of work settings that exist throughout this world. And then there isn't per se a coalition or maybe a particular institution that monitors the livelihoods also of women and who do have some informal sort of jobs, or who are part of the vast majority of certain countries where they are working women, and that can look in different ways. So I think even when we're thinking about the workplace, there's different categories of the workplace, and to be mindful that we're being inclusive, of women, regardless of what their work choices are, whether it's recognized by policy or not recognized by policy. But I think even governments have failed to consider the different unique challenges and also experiences of women, and even thinking about work settings in which climate, and with all that's going on in the world, the ways that climate and particularly impact women as well.
So Elizabeth, I wanted to, go back to something you said around the fact that there are different challenges in different workplaces. Not every workplace is the same. And that's true. So I wanted you to kind of break down what are some of the, self-care and well-being challenges in different contexts. So for example, what you mentioned about women in informal workplaces would be, a context that is different, that is not like every other workplace. Can you give us a sense of what are some of those different workplaces and what are some of the challenges when it comes to self-care and well-being that you know of?
Yeah, sure. I can just share from my experiences in traveling to different countries, including my own country of Haiti. So in Haiti, we are known for a lot of agricultural products. But women are the ones that coordinate those agricultural products and also sell them. So a lot of our farmers tend to be men. There are women farmers as well. So women are the ones that coordinate and also sell the products, and we call them Madame Sarah. So Madame Sarah is a well-known homage and identity for women who sell these products in markets. And these are not you're in a structured supermarket in a sense, but more so in different communities and villages. There are market days. So these are the women who sell and bargain with locals to sell these products. And then you have women who maybe in other sort of settings, maybe they're selling, we call them, we have different phone companies called Digicel and things like that. And you can find them supporting people and getting their airtime on their phones. You might find women in clinics. You might find women in offices of banks. You might find women in caretaking roles and being a nanny. So there are different variations across in terms of even just like in looking at the Haitian in the context in Haiti, which I think is similar to many other places
Yeah.
around the world. So I
Yeah.
think when considering these different nuances and categories of workplace, while we can have definitely a feminist lens, but we also have to have one that's equitable and one that is inclusive. Because I can talk about, oh, they don't provide, maternity leave at the office, but in those sort of different other types of whether someone has a child or not, they'll wrap the child behind them on their backs because they gotta work. So is it realistic or feasible to say, oh, we need to improve maternal leave, but that's only for a segment, of women. But how about for women who are selling local products, local produce? What types of workplace improvements? Because they're
Mm,
sitting by the road, they're taking in dust, they're taking in sun,
mm,
rain or shine, they're there. So I think
mm-hmm.
having, some of those intentional conversations when we're thinking about women and which type of workplaces are we thinking about when we're looking at a feminist lens.
Well, that's very important. What kind of well-being and self-care practices can workplaces have based on the type of workplace? Because it's not going to be a blanket practice across workplaces. And to both of you now looking at, I want us to kind of give examples of successful practices that you've seen. Both of you have long practices in self-care and well-being space. Could you share with our listeners some examples of successful organizations of workplaces that have instituted best practice or promising practices around self-care and well-being? And it would be useful to also see, are there some successful ones in different workspaces, like you're mentioning, Elizabeth, not just the corporate or one standard workplace, but maybe some good practices in other kinds of situations.
If I can just continue, I have to admit that even working in the US, and I worked in Haiti and Rwanda, so I think I have those three different lenses. I feel like in the US, there isn't workplace practice is very rare. I think at the current clinic that I work at, we do have a massage chair that's in our sort of kitchenette area. So if you do need to take a break, but that's like usually during your lunchtime. And then I would say that they do honor sort of giving us 5 months for maternity leave. But I think it's something that you have to sort of advocate for yourself and look for. And then I feel like when I worked in Haiti, I felt like self-care was like, not feeling the pressure to take an hour lunch break and no one's like trying to track you down or even I think the workplace culture is that you don't have to necessarily be always respond to your emails in 24 hours. I feel like there's a pressure in certain Western countries where I feel like you have to, but I feel like the wellness and being able to really enjoy your lunch hour, being able to really, if you need to take time off, people were flexible. There were also other people who were able to step in. I feel like it was very collective environment, and people really checked in with you too about how you're doing, not simply to say how are you doing and then good and then that's it, but really having some just informal conversations, and I felt really the environment was more relaxed when I was in Haiti, and then I think in Rwanda, I think for me, I appreciate how the Rwandans as well. I think especially in the organization I was in, there was more conversations about self-care, and I think there were different ways to do that. Maybe like after a long day of work, there was some gatherings, whether informally with employees or there were designated times during the month where employees' time or just putting on sort of like a social gathering was something that they just wanted folks to recognize folks like, I know you're working hard, we appreciate you. So I find some different elements depending on the country or the society.
At Jabali Consulting, we're launching Lead Boldly, a gender transformative CEO toolkit, a practical guide for CEOs, founders, HR leaders, and executive teams in the private sector who want to move beyond policies and actually transform their workplaces. Because gender inequality at work is not just about individuals, it's about systems, power, and everyday leadership decisions. Our Jabali Consulting 5-pillar approach guides you from leadership mindset and power analysis to inclusive leadership, safer culture, and market impact. It's designed to help you strengthen leadership pipelines, improve retention, and boost ESG performance by transforming your systems. If that sounds like your next step, join the waiting list on our website. That is www.jabaliconsulting.com, or click the description link below. Joining the waiting list entitles you to getting early bird discount, receiving exclusive insights, and priority booking on our advisory opportunities. Let's move from intention to real change in our workplaces and businesses. Yeah, and I see kind of like some places, especially Western countries, are more individualistic in terms of how they practice self-care. For specific employees, this is what we give you. Whereas from the examples you're giving, those in Africa and the developing countries are still more about collective care and well-being. Jen, what are some of the successful self-care and well-being practices that you've come across in the workplaces?
Well, I think generally good self-care practices when it comes, a company or institution down to the staff do one thing in particular. And that thing is to promote awareness of flexibility for and space for the holistic person, and not because they are hoping to get more labor out of them, right? So it's not here is this, therefore you give me more. It is a recognition of you are going to be a better person holistically, and that includes in this workplace, because as I mentioned before, work and life are in fact the same thing. And I think when it comes to specific practices, I have seen that practices that are really successful have really look at one of two things or kind of a combination. And the first one is looking at the collective. So looking at the community and implementing community building strategies that have been well documented by movement actors for years. And that would be things like creating public space where engagement can happen, whether that's for working relationships and projects, or if that's for, kind of during your downtime and wanting to build personal connections outside of work. Making sure you have resources available that everyone can do their work effectively. And because people have differing needs, it's really that attention to specific detail and really engaging with your community, your staff, to say, hey, what is it that you need? What do you not have? How can we make sure we provide it for you? And then I think the second thing is, and Elizabeth really touched on this and talked about it really well, like if we look at people as a monolith, and that's especially true for marginalized groups, if we're looking at them and their needs as monolithic, then we're going to be missing most of the specificity of need and the specificity of progress, both together. And so I think a really good strategy is one that actually is tailored to its particular staff members. So what would that look like? I think overall it looks like flexibility, allowing people to engage in the care that they need to, have relationships outside of the office, have access to the food, nutrition, exercise. All of that is time. And companies recognizing that holistic pool of needs for people and providing opportunity for them to get those needs met on their own time, but then also in the office. And I think a lot of, people are like, well, how does this work? Everyone would come in and they would have their own schedule and this wouldn't work. And I think that that's kind of what we're getting at here, is that a lot of this real, meaningful, impactful care and self-care, care by company to employee, care by institute to employee, care by government to citizen, all of those things. We're working on a framework that is inherently unfair and inherently minimizes women to the labor that they can get from them. And that goes for other marginalized groups as well. So I think it takes looking at that system and structures that be in that way, understanding that that is the case, whether we like it or not, and has always been, and then taking the steps to rectify it. So things that I see also, when we're looking at measurement of success or measurement of productivity, I hate this. So KPIs, I hate the concept of KPIs with a fiery passion. If someone else asks me to report back on a KPI, I won't do it. Because I just don't think that those are accurate measurements of anything.
What would you replace it with?
Well, I mean,
because that has been mainstreamed.
Context,
it's very true, Jen.
Absolutely.
It has been mainstreamed in work,
Yes.
KPIs,
Right.
log frames, and it's true. How do we reframe those?
But based on whose idea and conceptualization of success, and success for whom? Because I'm making the company a lot of money is not inherently my own success. And especially not if I'm really, caring about what my own needs are and being able to identify what my success is for myself. But again, I don't think that companies are really, I don't see a lot of, there are of course some, but there's not really a shift. We're still looking at KPIs as productivity. So, my business partner and I, when we go into organizations and we say these things, KPIs are a terrible measure of anything other than a business model economic framework. They say the same thing. Well, what do we measure it on? And because of the sector that we worked in, we say, and this is difficult, we're not saying that this is easy, but a real measure of shared progress is perspective. So looking at going into a company and asking the people within the company, women, men, gay, straight, all of the intersecting identities, how it is that environment is impacting you. And when women say to us, I feel welcome here, I feel accepted here, I feel supported here, that's a KPI, and one that I feel is an accurate reflection of, if you're trying to measure well-being in an office climate, for example, that's a real measurement. But how many people have taken advantage of a yoga class yesterday is not. So I just think that we're measuring it wrong. But I don't want to say it as though that has been arbitrary, and that the way that we measure has been just kind of randomly set. It's been set intentionally to not actually address real need. To bolster.
And I'm laughing. I'm laughing because now that I'm in private sector, moving from NGO world and into private sector, KPIs is such a big thing, and companies would definitely tell you. So then, how do we measure? How do we get a win back for our investment, and show that we're actually reaching our targets? But from what you're saying is that it doesn't necessarily. You may not do away with the growth KPIs, but bring in those that are more human-centered for your workers. Is that it, or what? What would be the argument?
Absolutely. But I also I have a real specific idea and skepticism when it comes to growth KPIs and growth metrics as well, and how it is we as a whole society, and that's global, look at progress, evaluate achievement, movement forward. And I think growth KPIs ain't it.
What would be the
conversation?
No, but it's interesting. And I think many companies, private sector, would be asking, yes, what else do we measure our growth of the company? Because also we're seeing a movement towards, not just focusing on productivity for the sake of it, but looking at your employees as human beings, like you're saying, the whole breadth of the human being who is helping you to grow the company. And so it would be important to kind of look at what are the measures the companies can use, especially in private sector, to ensure that they're looking at their workforce from a holistic kind of way that encompasses their well-being. Because if the workforce is, has better mental health and broader well-being, then it should ideally lead to better workplaces, right? So I don't know what else you can put there, because I know people will be like, especially in the private sector, so what do you want me to do?
And I mean, I haven't worked in the private sector in a long time. But I think if you're going to look at growth metrics or metrics for measuring a growth and achievement, I understand, especially private sector, if we're talking about private sector organizations that are really there in order to generate financial resource for the company, the product selling or skills selling or these sorts of things, then I think that putting those metrics, how much we've sold, what's our gross income, what kind of metrics do we have in terms of engagement on social, putting those at an equal footing as what does our staff think about the way it is that we do business? What is it that our staff thinks about their experience in the office? What do people say when we ask them, do you feel supported? So putting all of those on an equal footing and devoting resource also equitably to all of those things. I think that's a good start. Especially, and I think that it's doable. I think we have private sector examples where that's happening, and it doesn't result in less financial growth and achievement, right? So it's actually, it is actually efficient.
It is, and one of the biggest companies in Africa, it's a telecom company, Safaricom, based in Kenya. It has shown that actually investing in the well-being of all its staff directly enables greater productivity and greater profit. And I think it's a good example because they have invested in good gender policies, ensure that their maternity leave and paternity leave are equitable. They have flexi hours. They have childcare that they provide in their, their branches and in their head office, and all sorts of, I think structurally they've really hit the nail on the head, and they're still, of course, making things better. But I think they're one of the companies that show it, self-care and well-being doesn't have to be separate from the end profitability of a company. If you make a workplace, like you're saying, if it is conducive for both men and women, knowing the realities that are different for both men and women, and you try and be inclusive, then you make better employees. They stay longer, they're more loyal, and in the end, your profits come as a result. So, to your point, I think it's really true. And Jen, I think something that I wanted to ask you, because you brought, Elizabeth, you brought in some examples from other countries, Haiti and Rwanda. And I wanted to ask you to give us more perspective on what else can we learn from African and indigenous practices around self-care and well-being, because we, for many people who hear about what self-care, they may think, this is a Western concept. It was, it's not anything to do with us. You guys are just, you're just bringing Western concepts here. So Elizabeth, can you maybe give examples of what are some practices that indigenous and African, that come from African and indigenous practices of care that we can still learn from in this day and age?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think for me, when to that question, Africa is very vast, and indigenous cultures exist all throughout the world.
Mm,
So I think if anyone is interested in learning more about the indigenous culture, thinking about where you're located, or thinking about the country that you're from or the country that you're working in, and I think to understand the indigenous practice because it has evolved, is being able to understand the history of work within that particular region and country. So as I shared, like in Haitian culture, we have the Maransara, the women who are in the markets and and outdoors, selling different produce and products and things like that. And I think when I think about self-care for them, I think about the times that they take to possibly take a break if they can, or even after work, to walk by the ocean, or to take some time for prayer, or to engage in some storytelling of their day to their families, sitting outside as the sunset is going down. I think other practices of indigenous can be spiritual as well. So there are certain people that maybe light a candle before they go to sleep, or maybe someone might enjoy their favorite teas. So self-care doesn't have to be something that is sort of, yeah, made up, but it's just thinking about intergenerational practices as well. Because indigenous culture is evolving. There's some indigenous culture that we don't even have access to, that they're very remote, and they and just their evolution into this sort of modern or technological society is preserved. So I think when we're thinking about indigenous or African practices, is really taking a step back to reflect on where are we from, what is the ethnic groups or the tribes that we're from, what have they practiced, and how do I incorporate that more in my life? Or what are subtle messages that I see of self-care, maybe that my grandparents engaged in, or that is a passed down family tradition. I could say for me, self-care is playing dominoes with my loved ones, like, because we enjoy the game. So it doesn't mean that you're totally in rest all the time. So it really does depend on, if for self-care, maybe someone is maybe their favorite meal, they get to really enjoy it, like mindfully enjoy the meal. It's not in a rush, like, okay, I'm like putting things in the microwave, but I'm taking my time to make a meal, or I'm taking time to stop by my local restaurant or my local street vendor, and having a conversation with them. After my busy day, I'm having some type of social connection, or I'm enjoying something that is a meal. So I think self-care can be what it means for the person, for the region, for the culture, and really taking the time to think about, what does this mean for you? And then even in terms of thinking about self-care or wellness, it could even be through dance as well, through art as well, through hair braiding. Someone, I think there was a friend of mine, she's from Jamaica, and I stopped by her place, and then she washed my hair for me. Something that I'm like,
Oh,
it's a self-care. Like, she
that's
washed my
nice.
hair for me,
Yeah.
and then she offered me some tea, and then she plaited it for me. And I'm like,
Mm.
this is a form of
That's
self-care that
collective.
is just like,
Yeah, and
yeah,
collective
us
care
as
for you.
Caribbean
Yeah.
women, we know, like, hair is very important for us, and especially we're
Yeah.
natural, we wear our hair is natural. And she just took the time, and that's just like, so once again, self-care could be cultural influence, indigenous influence. It could be a social connection, or even important pastime. The last time that I really had someone plait my hair is my mother. I remember sitting, between her legs on the floor, and she'll pat, and that was also a form of self-care. When she
Yeah.
would tell me about stories about our family, about our culture, I would listen in and I get to relax a bit. So I think it can be reimagined in different ways. So I think those are still realistic and attainable and practical. It doesn't have to be like you have to go and have an appointment, with a massage therapist, which is great, or some people it's therapy, but also what are the day to day or the places around you or things that you can tap back into you as well.
I love that. I love that practicality, and that it's different depending on where you're from. And it doesn't have to be, the practices don't have to be so out of your reach. And it's, things that we've also grown up having, like, I can relate to my mother plaiting my hair, or, a girlfriend also helping me do that. That's really good. So, Jen, I wanted to also give you a chance to tell us about what are your personal self-care practices that we can, we learn from each other.
We do, that's right. I mean, I have so many, big and small. I'll go macro to micro. I am very lucky, but also I have prioritized um, working with people that I think are kind, caring, supportive people. And I think that that's been my biggest gift to myself in terms of self-care, and recognizing that sometimes that means saying no to certain opportunities, and maybe saying no to some sort of financial remuneration opportunities. But knowing that working with someone who maybe doesn't have my best interest at heart, or our values don't align, that causes so much more hardship to me based on experience than missing a project or two worth of financial resources. And again, that's a very privileged thing to be able to select, but it is something that I do. Because I think, again, with this work-life balance thing, that not being a thing, the people that you're working with sometimes, for most of us, that's around 40 hours a week, many of us much more in practice. That's a lot of time to be spending with people and in spaces where you feel maybe uncomfortable. And I respect my comfort. I think it's important. And so I don't subject myself to things that I know will maybe create harm. So that's the biggest one. And then, kind of moving in, my community is the most important thing in the world to me. And I dedicate so much time. I almost see my community and my friendship as a job. So I would say on an average day, I'm spending 2 to 3 hours collectively at least, whether that's something simple as writing memes and leaving voice notes, but really continuing to build this really solid framework, which takes investment and it takes time. And again, I have the ability, the privilege, but also I've made the choice to prioritize that, because that brings me the most safety, the most support, and just the most happiness, really. And then getting even smaller, I'm a Pilates instructor, and I became a Pilates instructor as an act of self-care, knowing that I'm really bad at, waking up in the morning, especially, in Northern Europe where I am, where it's cold, and I don't want to go to the gym, and I probably won't go unless others rely on me to be there. So I'm a Pilates instructor, so I don't have the luxury of just canceling last minute. And so I've compelled myself to do it, because I know that physical well-being and investing in my body and my physical strength really has a correlation to my emotional and mental strength and well-being. And over years have been able to create a practice of it. And then dancing. I love dancing.
Oh,
I went dancing 2 weekends ago, and it was an 80s and 90s evening, which is really my kryptonite. I mean, you put some 80s music on, it's all over for me. And I went there, and it was for people over 40, which was also tremendous. And I was one of the younger ones there, so I felt that was just a really bizarre situation. But I danced, I think, for 6 hours straight.
oh,
I was so
wow.
sore the next day. I looked
Wow.
down at my phone, and it had captured something like 9 miles worth of dancing. And I could feel the benefit of that amount of energy release and
Yes.
engagement with the music. And, sometimes you catch eyes with someone across, and you're just like, yeah, girl, you did great. You did, dancing a little. Yeah. I think that that's one of the things that I will continue to do now, having just done it, and seeing how much it adds to just my general sense of well-being and happiness, especially in these periods of absolute no vitamin D to be seen. So big, medium, small, all of the things, but it's all also really based on my ability to identify my own needs. And that is also both a real thing that you have to invest time and active labor in, but also something that is a privileged position to be in, to identify those and be able to separate those from societal or normative expectations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And, I've learned something from you, the importance of also self-awareness, to know what are the things that bring you joy, when is your energy being depleted, who is depleting it, so that you can also, take care of yourself in that way. So we've come to the end of our episode, Jen and Elizabeth. One last thing we're asking all our guests, because this series is on gender equality in the workplace. Could each of you give me 3 words to describe a gender equal institution?
It might be more than 3 words, but when I think about it is equity, because I think people are still tripped up by equal. We're all equal. No, we're not necessarily. So equity. And I do think my second word or phrase would be feminist, or like feminist practices. Like, it has to be interwoven. And then also, I think also with another term would be collective care. Because I feel that in a workplace, especially, we're not there in silos, usually. That we do need a sense of community, a sense of belonging. And I think that can all go under the collective care framework.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. And Jen?
It's really hard to do 3 words. I would say the first one is reflective. So an organization, an institution that's constantly reevaluating and looking at how policies, practices are actually impacting community within the team or office or larger stakeholder groups that they work with. So reflective, holistic, really trying to support worker well-being, community well-being as a whole, as we've talked about today, allowing people to be full humans when they approach their work and their community at work. And then I think the last one I really like is curious. Really a workplace that is really interested in finding out the specificity of need in order to make things better, in order to be a more reflective, in order to be a more feminist, in order to be a more equitable space. So that curiosity about how we get to those things, how we find a better sense of, equality, equitable labor, these sorts of things. I think that's it. So reflective, holistic, and curious. I'll stick with those.
Oh, fabulous. A nice way to bring us to a close of this conversation. Thank you so much, Jen and Elizabeth, for this inspiring conversation about self-care and well-being in the workplace. Today's conversation reminds us that self-care is not only about the individual, it's collective, it's cultural, and deeply political. And we've seen that true wellness is impossible without dealing with the structural injustices that impact or harm our well-being as employees and people in the workplace. So thank you so much, and we look forward to another conversation another time. You can listen to this and past episodes of the Ubuntu Narratives podcast on the Jabali Consulting website at jabaliconsulting.com/podcast or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening to the Ubuntu Narratives podcast by Jabali Consulting. Until next time.